From the EP043 studios in Splendora, Texas, the Constitutional Corner is brought to you by Splendora Cafe and Barbecue.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Constitutional Corner. I'm your host, Craig McMichael, here with Mark Hogan.
Hello, everybody.
Before we start today, I wanted to take a moment and pause and reflect. Coming up this Sunday is the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks on our country. And I just want to remind everybody to keep in your thoughts and prayers, not only the people that died that day, but the military men and women and their families who made many sacrifices for the years to follow in the war in Afghanistan. I'm glad we got out of there, even though it was a debacle leaving.
Yeah, it was. It's hard to believe it was 21 years ago that all that came about.
It was life-changing for me. I ended up going in Afghanistan and fighting that war. I'm sure it was life-changing for a lot of you out there, too.
Right.
So without further ado, you know, as Shakespeare said in Henry V, once more into the breach, my friends.
And today's breach is immigration.
Immigration.
The rules and how they apply to the Constitution. What is going on at the border, Craig?
That's right. We're going to talk about immigration, naturalization, how that applies to the Constitution, and what is going on in our country right now. Because to me, this is an invasion. This is a attack on our sovereignty, and our government is allowing it to happen. And I think a lot of people will feel the way I feel, that you don't really have a lot of power over this, and there's not anything you can do to fight back against that, and that could be a problem. So the first part of the Constitution that would mention that would be Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, which is part of the enumerations of the Constitution, and that's where it gives Congress the power for naturalization. And what they have there is they have the ability to decide what foreigner can or cannot become a citizen of this country and the process that they are required to go through.
And that's where the rules are all laid out. Who can come in, what they have to, the parameters they have to meet to be eligible.
Congress is required to lay out these rules and to put these things in place. Another one that would apply would be Article 1 or Article 4, Section 4, Clause 2. And that's where it says the government is responsible for securing the states against an invasion, which I think, and a lot of people watching the show may agree, that we are currently under invasion. Not from a foreign army, but from foreign citizens that are invading our country. They're taking advantage of our system. They're utilizing our welfare state. And it's really a burden on the taxpayers what's going on at our southern border right now.
Look at the countries that people are pouring into our southern border from. 159 different countries. These are all not just Mexicans, Venezuelans, and Hondurans. They are going to Mexico to enter our southern border. And the sad thing is, we don't know who they are.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, they don't know who they are.
And if that doesn't constitute an invasion, I don't know what does.
Well, what's even worse is the ones that they do know that they capture on the border, they just release into the country. They fly them around the country, generally at night, to your neighborhoods to live amongst you. And we're not saying that all these people are bad people. What we're saying is our government's responsible for securing our country. Why do we have a government that talks about protecting the borders of Taiwan? Or sending $80 billion to Ukraine so Ukraine can protect their borders.
And weapons to protect their border.
That's right. And then we're not allowed to protect our own sovereignty and our own nation here.
How many known people on the terror watch list have they caught as of now? Last figure I heard was in the 50s.
Yeah, so in the past year, they've captured 56 people that were known terrorists, and that's only people they actually apprehended at the border that matched the terrorist watch list. And so that ties into why I wanted to mention September 11th, because that was the largest terrorist attack on our nation. It was devastating, and that was committed by way less than 56 people. I think there were 4 hijackers on each plane. That'd be 16 terrorists. They mainly trained in Saudi Arabia and then sent over here.
That's the way I heard it, too. Didn't take many.
It didn't take many, so if you talk about 56 that were apprehended, imagine the amount of people that aren't apprehended.
And they're in our communities right this minute.
That's correct. So let's talk about some of the laws that are in place. And I want to remind you, Congress is the one with the authority to control immigration and naturalization. A lot of people look to the president for this, but that's not a presidential authority. When you see our presidents writing all these executive orders, that's not what the founders had intended.
You mean the president can't get up there and wave his wand and say, we're not going to protect the borders anymore, the border control agents are just going to be processing people, and we're going to fly these people in the dead of night to all points across the country?
They're not supposed to. You know, if the president had that type of authority, that would kind of be the monarchy that we fought against in the Revolution, which I look at our current government and the state that it's in, the massive size of the federal government, the taxation without representation, or the taxation with representation that we have no control over, the rules, regulations, laws that they're putting down on the people. And it's really like we're living in an oppressive monarchy right now because most people feel like they don't have any control over this. So one of the big laws that talks about immigration is the Immigration and Naturalization Act that was first passed in 1952. It has been amended in 1965 and 1986, which I want to talk about for a second.
I'll remember that, yeah.
So 1986 is when Ronald Reagan was president, and the Democrats controlled the Congress, and their whole thing was, well, we're going to legalize, I think it was about 3 million illegal immigrants.
I think it was about that. We're going to legalize these 3 million individuals here in exchange for securing the borders, and that was a trade-off, and we'll be done with this whole thing. Fix the immigration system, correct?
That's right. They were going to fix the system. They were secure the border, and we were going to legalize everybody that was here illegally to make them all citizens, and the problem would be solved. 86, that was a long time ago. That was 26 years ago. I still think the border's 10 times worse now than it was then.
36.
36, you're right. My math is off.
Yeah, I was only 4 then.
It's because I don't have my glasses on today.
I understand.
That's what it is. And then in 1990, we passed another amendment to the Immigration Reform Care Act, and the latest was 1996 under President Bill Clinton.
Right.
And that one really was not about attacking people that were in the country legally. It was about illegals. They were going to deport them. They were going to go after the businesses that had hired them, and they were going to make sure the court proceedings actually tried them and removed them from the country. That hasn't really worked out for us. I have my own theories on this. One of the big ones is I like to tell people, if you want to talk about immigration and how to fix the problem, everybody talks about a border wall. A border wall, yes, a barrier stops people from coming in would help, but you're not going to stop people if you don't stop what they're coming for. And so as citizens, we should ask ourselves, why are all these people trying to get into our country? And the easy answer is they're looking for a better quality of life.
Sure.
That's true.
I can't blame them.
I can't blame them 100%. If I was born in one of those third world countries, I would come to America right now.
But they have been taught what to say when they get here. Asylum is the key word. I feel persecuted, and I'm being persecuted on my beliefs or whatever, and I need a political asylum. And there you go.
Which is interesting because technically under federal law, you can only claim asylum from outside of the country. You have to go to a consulate or an embassy outside of the United States to claim asylum. Before you can be granted asylum and brought into the country. You're not supposed to claim it once in the country and then be allowed to stay here.
Yeah, much less flown to Chicago and then show up 2 years for your asylum case. You know, people aren't showing up for those. 90% of them never show up for their hearing.
There's a lot of them that don't ever show up. There's a lot of them that are good, hardworking people.
Of course.
But if we don't have a policy in place where we control who's coming into this country and who's not, you got to remember, in our past episodes, we talked about taxation and debt. We're $30.7 trillion in debt. We can no longer sustain the course that we're on. We have to look at where this money is being wasted. You have millions of people, and we're going to get into the numbers in a minute, millions of people that are coming in this country that are utilizing the systems and services that we have in place.
Right.
So I always say, if you wanted to stop them from coming into the country, you wanted to make them go home, self-deport themselves, really all you'd have to do is take away all the candy. If you actually punished a business, if a business hired an illegal immigrant,
that's the way it was supposed to be, from what I heard.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
I had a buddy that ran a lawn care service back in 85, 86. And then when that law came to be in 1986, when they did the revision of that, he disbanded because all his guys, a lot of his guys were illegal. Everybody knew it. He paid them cash, but he was afraid of the $10,000 per head fine per day. It would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. He went out of business and went to work at a hardware store.
Yeah, I mean, they could take their business license from him. The state could.
Oh, yeah.
So those are some things that they could do. Definitely not give them any sort of social services. They've come here illegally. If they want to do it, there's a process. And, you know, my wife immigrated to this country. And so it's not easy to immigrate to America the correct way. But maybe that's part of the problem too. Maybe we should streamline that system.
Streamline that and make it a whole lot easier for good, hardworking, honest people, like most of them are, to come on in here and get it done instead of waiting 10 years in another country. And I don't know how they do it, but it's a mess. It is a mess.
It is a mess, and that's the thing that we should ask ourselves: do we want just anybody coming into the country? You know, MS-13 gang members, people that are convicted of felonies, crimes, rape, murder, sex trafficking, and other things across the world? Or do we want doctors, engineers, scientists, and people who actually want to be here, who have something to contribute to the rest of the society?
Well, the immigration policy should be for the betterment of our country. I don't think there's anything selfish about that.
Yeah, there's not. So let's get into some of the numbers on this. I pulled some of the numbers before this episode. In July 2022, 163,000 immigrants were detained at the borders in 1 month at the border locations. And that's just people that were detained. The Border Patrol will tell you they estimate about 40% of them are not detained, that 40% of the people actually just get into the country. On that pace, we're on pace to add 2 million people a year illegally to this country. What's fascinating about that is they estimate there are 40 million illegal immigrants in the country right now.
Right. The big number has always been 11 or 12 million, but you know what? They've been saying that for 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
What's another thing that's a problem to me is of that 163,000 in July, 15,000 of them were unaccompanied minors.
Right.
You're talking about children that were by themselves walking across the border. And walking across the border is interesting to me. We discussed before the show the press secretary.
They're not just walking across the border.
Yeah, it's kind of like recession. The government just gaslights and changes terminology.
This is not a recession. Zero inflation. I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, so our current administration's claiming people aren't just walking across the border, but anybody that's dealt with the border or knows what's going on knows that's exactly what's occurring. And then drugs are a big problem. The cartels are utilizing this border to bring drugs into our country. And a lot of hardcore drugs, heroin, cocaine,
Can you imagine
fentanyl.
how rich the cartel is on this whole open border operation?
They're making a lot of money with sex trafficking too.
Right.
Currently, it's estimated that 50,000 women are being sex trafficked inside the United States of America. 50,000 people that could possibly be in your neighborhood are sex slaves.
Modern day sex slaves.
Being sold and blackmailed for slavery, for sexual favors. This is a bigger problem because not only is that a big number, and not only are those people going through horrendous conditions that most of us wouldn't understand, that means there are people in our society that are utilizing their services. It could be our neighbors, it could be people we work with. There's a larger problem here that we need to address as citizens about what's going on.
Unfortunately, as a country, there's a market for that kind of thing, for the drugs, sex.
So the big drug that's a concern to me is the fentanyl. And so
That's the hot new thing.
They saw a 203% increase of fentanyl coming across the border. And again, this is only the fentanyl they captured.
It more than doubled last year.
That's right. And what's dangerous about that, the small amount of fentanyl that's required to actually kill you is unbelievable.
Well, that's a synthetic opiate.
That's correct.
And it was invented around 1960. Considered too dangerous in this country to be used until about 1979, when it was used in anesthesia, other surgeries in a controlled environment. But it was outlawed all that time because it was they were afraid that it would be unleashed into the recreational drugs, right? And here we are.
Is that what y'all used in your anti-war protests for Vietnam?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I was 7 years old then. It didn't take much fentanyl for me to get hopped up, buddy.
So the dangerous part is now they're dressing up fentanyl to look like candy. And I know a lot of you think, well, my kid will never do drugs. I'd like to remind you, we were all teenagers once. We all did stupid things. We all did things that we probably shouldn't have done that we regret. Peer pressure is a real problem.
And you think you're going to live forever when you're that age.
That's right. And so this fentanyl is dangerous. And actually, fentanyl surpassed all other illegal drugs as the #1 killer of American citizens. I could be wrong, but I think the number was 170,000 Americans died last year from fentanyl.
Guess where fentanyl is?
China.
80% comes from China.
That's right. The Chinese government is waging a war against the American population through social media, through drugs. They're trying to morally decay our society.
Nothing happens in or out of China without the Communist Chinese government approving it.
And so I want to mention real quick the drastic danger of voting in political parties that are in control in this country. So if you look at the last year that President Trump was in office, they captured or apprehended around 500,000 migrants coming into the country. It's not a very big number. That's still way higher than it should be. But the first year that Biden took office, it was 1.7 million. They had 1.2 million more migrants come into the country than they had under the Trump administration.
Some of them are wearing Biden T-shirts.
Yeah. And under the Trump administration, they were actually sending them back to be detained in Mexico to await their trials. Now they're just, like I said, they're just shipping them all over the country to live in our communities.
Here's a thought. If I was to go down there and pick up a group of people at the border and ship them around the country, wouldn't I be in trouble for human smuggling?
You would be. And actually, there was a federal judge that was just caught around Corpus Christi and arrested for human smuggling. This federal, I'm pretty sure he was a judge, was transporting 3 or 4 illegal immigrants in his car. And when he was pulled over, he at first kind of resisted. He was very aggressive with the officers that stopped him. And then from what I heard was he told him he was a judge. And then he said he just picked these people up on the side of the road and he was just trying to give them a ride. But he didn't know where they were going.
Story kept changing.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story. So let's break into, what do we do about this? How do we control this?
Well, there's laws in place, so why aren't they following them?
That's the big question we need to.
The why is the key.
That's the big question we need to ask. You know, we get to vote for a lot of the judges, not at the federal level, but the state and the city and the county.
Sure, yeah.
Do you know who these judges are? Do you know what their beliefs are? Are they holding people accountable? You know, here in Houston and Harris County, you hear stories of people that commit armed robbery or commit a felony with a weapon, aggravated assault. They're released on bond,
right?
Put right back out in the streets, and then murder someone.
And murder somebody, and they got 100 prior arrests, 50, 60, 100.
So elections are one way to fix that, but there's another way, what would also be elections. There are a way to fix the judges. It's called impeachment. Impeachment's not just for the President of the United States of America. You can impeach any elected official and remove them from office. And if we had state reps and U.S. congressmen that actually believed in the Constitution and upholding the rule of law, you would start seeing impeachment of these judges that are trying to dictate constitutional law from the bench. That's not their job.
Unfortunately, I think the general population has to just be so fed up and pissed off to do anything that it may be too late, or they feel it's too late.
I feel like a large percentage of the population feels this way. And you know what's fascinating to me is when I bump into people that study and understand the Constitution the way I do, or just very Christian conservative people, what I've found is that a lot of them really just want to be left alone. They want to live their life in freedom and liberty.
That's the majority of everybody, and I don't care what you call them, left, right, blue, red. People just want to go to work and have their kids in a secure school and pay the reasonable taxes and make a living and pursue happiness.
No taxes, Mark. I want to pay no taxes.
No taxes.
I actually identify as
episode 1. That's right.
Yeah, I now identify as a tax-free shelter. I'm going to see if the government accepts that on my next.
Well, there's 87,000 people against you.
Yeah, so you know that's one of the problems, and then another problem. Congress with their 11% approval rating, it's almost impossible to get anything changed there. We have an election coming up in November. A lot of people will go vote, but quite frankly, while this election's important, it's nowhere near as important as the primaries were, where you had an actual opportunity to elect constitutionally based people to show up on the November ballots that would actually make a difference. And a lot of people just don't pay attention. But back to the left alone, I feel like our government's playing a dangerous game right now. If you saw the president's speech last week in front of Independence Hall with the wet red background, you know, banging on the podium, talking about fascists, you know, a lot of people in the country are fascists.
Basically, anybody who doesn't agree with me is a Nazi.
This is a dangerous game because if you take people who want to be left alone, people who just want to live their life in peace and happiness and tranquility, and you start pushing this type of tyranny on them where they feel like they have no other option, you're setting yourself up for a dangerous game. And I'm not encouraging any sort of violence against anybody in this country. I still think we have the power as the people to make the difference.
Yeah, and the other side of that is if you can convince enough people that that this other group is the most vile, detestable group of people, semi-fascists, whatever you want to call them, that justifies any behavior against that group.
That's right. You will start seeing other people in the public, you know, the Antifas and some of these other groups that will start attacking people, kind of like what you saw during the COVID lockdowns. You know, if you didn't wear your mask in the grocery store, you would get surrounded by people and verbally assaulted. And now the CDC has admitted the masks really don't work the way they were supposed to. They weren't very effective.
Well, they've got enough control groups now, you know, heavily masked or not masked at all. There's no difference in cases.
Yeah. So another thing we can do is we can go back to Article 4, Section 4, Clause 2 of the Constitution about the invasion. And I want to share a story. A lot of you probably don't know. This is from 1913 and 1914.
Right.
In Colorado. It's called the Colorado Coldfield War.
That was very interesting.
It was very interesting. So a lot of the coal mines were owned by Rockefellers. And they had very horrendous working conditions in the Colorado area. And the workers revolted and went on strike. And so Rockefeller, at the time, it was normal for a private company to send in security guards. And so they sent in security guards to quell these miners, because basically what the miners are doing is if other workers came in, they were attacking the other workers.
Right.
So
were they unionized?
There were no unions.
No unions in 1913.
Yeah, there were no unions in 1913. Like I said, pay was horrendous and work conditions were horrendous.
Right.
So the coal miners fought back against the private security for the Rockefeller Company, and the governor called in the National Guard. And there were actual multiple battles over the course of months between these coal miners and the National Guard. There are incidents where the National Guard would sit up on the hills above these camps the coal miners had set up with their families and would shoot down into the camps and kill women and children. And then it got to a point where it was so deadly and violent that the governor actually utilized Article 4, Section 4, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution and declared an invasion. Now, you can do that against U.S. citizens if they're revolting against the state and the power. And Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time, sent federal troops into Colorado to suppress this invasion. This is what we should push our elected leaders, our governors, to do now. We are being invaded from the southern part of our country, and our governors should declare an invasion. That would force the federal government to put U.S. troops on the border to stop this massive flow of migrants. Now, I could probably predict with 100% certainty that they wouldn't put the troops on the border. But then they would be in clear violation of the Constitution. They wouldn't be protecting the states. And once one thing falls apart, it all falls apart.
But once you find 59 known terrorists coming across the border and you don't know how many others got away, can't you call that an invasion? Wouldn't Governor Abbott here in Texas be well within his rights to declare that?
He would be, and actually I think there's 7 or 8 counties in the state of Texas that have declared an invasion because the counties can do it. But the county declaration doesn't mean anything without the governors declaring it.
Right.
So the last thing I really have for this is we want to start taking viewer questions. We're getting a lot of questions to our email. That's studio13media@gmail.com.
Right.
If you hear any of our episodes, you have a question, you think we're wrong, you want to tell us how wonderful we're doing, we'd love to hear all about it.
Cookies. We like cookies.
We like cookies. We get cookies every week.
Our Facebook page is blowing up too.
Our Facebook page is really growing. So if you want to find us on Facebook, that's easy to do. I think it's Montgomery County Liberty Bell. I'll have to look into the Facebook. We'll post the Facebook link
Just
on this
search the
video.
Constitutional Corner and it'll take you there.
Okay, so our question today is actually from a gentleman named David in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent in, where should he go to learn more about the Constitution? And how should he utilize that information to get people to understand it better?
Well, you can read the Constitution itself.
That's a good place.
Yeah, that's a little tough.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, David, I struggle with this all the time, especially the part of getting people to understand the Constitution. It's all there in black and white on the internet. I'll tell you, a good analogy for the issue that I have is, how do we get society to understand the Constitution or care about the Constitution more than they care about the Kardashians? That seems to be a running trend in our country
Boy,
today.
that ain't no joke, isn't it?
People seem to care about things that don't matter.
The Johnny Depp trial. Oh, my God.
Yeah, and I really think this is a cause and effect of we're in a containment center. As citizens, we're in a containment center where we pay our taxes, we go to work. Our life's relatively comfortable in the U.S. We have good roads, we have good water, we have electricity, we have shopping malls, we have movie theaters. You can go out and eat dinner. The grocery stores are already stocked. So they've made us very comfortable in our cage. We don't have the freedoms and the liberty that people had 100 years ago. If they just time traveled to today, they would be amazed by the tyranny that we put up with from our federal government. So there are a lot of online resources. 10th Amendment Center is a good place. Prager University, the Constitutional Corner is a good place to learn about the Constitution. You can actually read the documents online. You can find the Federalist Papers and read those online. They're a little long. They're going to take you some time to read them and go through them. Madison actually took notes of what they debate about in the Constitutional Convention.
I love getting into that.
You can read those. And then as far as getting people to understand, I'll tell you where a lot of us have failed is we need to start local at home, right? Do you talk to did you talk to your family and children about the Constitution? Have you explained what the amendments are for? Why you're not required to quarter soldiers? Why you have the right not to self-incriminate?
Right. You don't want your kids learning anything about the way the government works from their friends or the social media, the memes that are flying at them and everything.
Yeah, why we've made it such a taboo to talk about constitutional issues. And I'm not talking about politics because a lot of people get very heated in politics, and we try to stay out of that on this show. We stick with the constitutional issues. Just talk about what the Constitution actually says, what the words mean, what the founders thought, and there's no debate about it. Not only do they have the Federalist Papers and the Constitution itself and the Declaration of Independence, you can go online and find a lot of actual letters that Jefferson, Adams, Madison, even George Washington, all these people wrote to other people talking about constitutional issues that are very informative. They're easy to find. And that's personally where I would start. I would start with self-awareness and learning, researching the issues yourself, and then breach into your family. Make sure they understand their constitutional freedoms.
Right. Well, I think that's got it. David from North Carolina, I hope that helps.
I think that's it. I can't see anything.
Right. So, people, thank you so much for joining us. Get out there and vote. Get out there and vote. If you don't exercise your rights, they don't mean anything, right?
You can't complain if you don't do it.
So, thank you for joining us today. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. For Craig McMichael, this is Mark Hogan, and that's the way we see it. What do you think?